They came to our cabin door an hour after we'd unpacked, told us there'd been an accommodation error, and asked us to gather our things and follow a steward down 11 decks to an interior room with no window at all, because somebody with more letters after their name than a tired man and his 10-year-old needed our view. I didn't argue. I've learned, in places a lot harder than a cruise ship, that you can lose a room and still keep your composure. And I wasn't about to let my son watch his father beg for a balcony. So I zipped the bags, put my hand on Cole's shoulder, and we started down that long corridor toward the belly of the ship. And that's when the captain, out on the open deck, doing his afternoon rounds in front of a couple hundred passengers, stopped walking, turned, looked straight at me, and stood at attention, and saluted. 200 people on that deck went quiet at once, because nobody, not me, not the cruise director who just evicted us, not one single soul leaning on that railing, understood yet why the captain of an 80,000-ton ship was standing on his own promenade deck, honoring the man they'd just kicked out of his suite. I'll tell you the whole thing. It's worth the voyage, I promise you that. But before we cast off, do me one favor. If you believe the quiet ones, the ones who never raise their voice, the ones who'll take a smaller room without a word so their kid doesn't see them fight, if you believe people like that deserve to be seen once in a while, hit subscribe and settle in. That's the only fare I'll ever ask. Now let me back this ship up to the dock and tell you how a man like me ended up with the captain's own suite in the first place, and why losing it cut as deep as it did. My name is Marcus Whitfield. I'm 39. For 14 years I worked structural fire. Ladder company, the kind of job where you go up when everybody else is coming down. I'm not in it anymore. A collapse 4 years ago took most of the hearing in my left ear and put enough steel in my hip that airport security and I are old friends. I don't advertise any of that. You'd have looked at me on that dock and seen a sunburned dad in a faded department, t-shirt wrangling a duffel bag and a kid. And that's exactly how I've arranged it. I did the job. Better men than me didn't walk away from theirs. I don't need a medal to prove it to strangers. There's a thing nobody warns you about leaving a job like that. You expect some part of the world to keep recognizing you for it. It doesn't. You become, very quickly, just a guy, slow getting up from a chair, wincing on stairs, and the fellow behind you in line at the pharmacy sighs like you're the inconvenience. You learn the world doesn't owe you a thing for what it cost you, and mostly it won't pay it. So you make peace with being ordinary. Most days it doesn't sting. But I'd forgotten, honestly, standing in that corridor with my bags, what it felt like to be looked at like I mattered. I'm a single dad. My son's name is Cole. He's 10, and he is the reason I get out of bed working a body that doesn't always cooperate. His mother, my wife Renata, died 3 years ago. Not illness. A highway accident on a rainy November night. Gone in about 4 seconds. No warning. No goodbye. No chance to do a single thing about it. One phone call and the whole architecture of my life came down at once. The way a building does when you pull the wrong beam. I know exactly what that sounds like, professionally and personally, and I'll tell you it's a sound I still hear some nights. Renata was the one who made our house feel like a house. She grew up going to sea. Her father ran cargo boats out of a little port town, and she used to say the ocean was the one place that made her feel small in a good way, the way it puts your whole life in proportion. She always wanted to take a real cruise someday, nothing fancy, Just the two of us out on open water watching the horizon do that thing where it disappears. We never got to go. There was always a mortgage payment that mattered more, a car repair, a kid to save for. After she died, I found a list in her handwriting in a kitchen drawer. Not a bucket list, nothing dramatic. Just a page of small hopes. Near the bottom, in her rushed cursive. Take Cole on the water someday. Let him see what I saw. That line is the reason we were on that ship. I started a jar. Not metaphorically. An actual mason jar on top of the refrigerator, the same one Renata used to keep loose change in for the laundromat. Every week, whatever I could spare went in. Some weeks it was $40. Some weeks it was $4. Cole knew what it was for. The ocean jar, he called it. And every so often he'd drop in his allowance without being asked. Very solemn about it. And I never once told him to keep it for himself, even though it broke something in me each time. Because a 10-year-old shouldn't have to save up to keep a promise to his dead mother. I picked up extra shifts, teaching fire safety courses on weekends, work that doesn't ask much of a bad hip. I put off replacing a truck that needed replacing. And 2 years later, dollar by dollar, that jar held enough. Not just for a cruise, but for the suite. Because I decided, somewhere in there, that if we were finally doing this, we were doing it the way Renata would have wanted for her boy. Cole was going to have the good room, the one with the wraparound window, just once in his life, so he could stand there and watch the horizon disappear exactly the way his mother described it. That jar is what the man with the clipboard was reaching for, whether he knew it or not, when he came to take that room away. So you'll understand what it meant when we walked into that suite, and Cole stood in front of the floor-to-ceiling window with his mouth open and said, "Dad, is this really where we're staying?" That was the best 10 seconds I'd had in 2 years. I let myself believe for about an hour that I'd finally done something exactly right. Then there was a knock at the door. A cruise director, young, clipped with the kind of smile that doesn't reach anywhere near the eyes, told me there'd been a booking conflict. A corporate charter had come aboard last minute, needing the suite for a board member's family. And we were being re-signed to an interior stateroom. No window. 11 decks down. I said, "I'm sorry, reassigned. I paid for the..." I have the confirmation right here. I started pulling out my phone. He gave me the look. I know that look from a lot of years and a lot of doorways. The look that prices your t-shirt and your son's sneakers in half a second and decides how loudly you're allowed to object. "I understand the frustration, sir," he said, "but this is the fairest way to accommodate everyone. Fairest for a board member's family who needed the good view more than a firefighter's kid who'd waited 2 years for it. Here's the part I keep circling back to. They didn't reassign a man in a business suit. They didn't pick someone who looked like they'd call a lawyer before the door even shut. They walked that hallway and found the guy who looked like he'd take it quietly. They picked us because we looked like people who'd be grateful for whatever was left over." And Cole looked up at me, his face already starting to fall, and said, "Dad, do we have to leave? I thought this one was ours." What do you say to that? What do you say to your 10-year-old on the trip his dead mother wrote down on a list? When a man with a lanyard has just decided he doesn't rate a window? I crouched down and said, "You know what, bud? Below decks is where the ship actually runs. That's where the real sailors stay. Let's go see it." Because the one thing that man was not walking away with was my son's excitement for that trip. He could have the suite. He wasn't getting Cole's smile. I stood up, picked up both bags myself, and started down that corridor with my head level. Because I've carried men heavier than my own pride out of worse places than a hallway, and I wasn't giving that director the satisfaction of watching me argue. But inside, I was coming apart. Not over the room, a room's a room. I've slept in firehouse bunks and worse. Over the fact that it happened in front of my son. Over the fact that a 2-year promise got erased in 90 seconds by a man with a tablet, and Cole had to watch it happen. That's the part that guts a parent. Not what they do to you. What your kid learns, watching, about how much the world thinks his father is worth. I would have carried those bags to the engine room myself before I let that be the lesson. What I didn't know was that someone on that promenade deck had already seen the whole thing and had no intention of letting it stand. An older deckhand, a woman who'd been coiling line near the railing, had watched the director's face, watched Cole's face crumple. And this part I only learned later, had noticed the faded ladder company patch still sewn into the strap of my duffel bag. The one habit from the job I never did break. She'd noticed the way I favoured my hip going down the steps. She went straight to the bridge and told the captain exactly what she'd seen happening to a passenger in his corridor. I had no idea any of this was happening. All I knew was that Cole and I were crossing the open promenade deck, bags in hand, headed for the interior stairwell, when the ship's captain, a broad, silver-haired man in dress whites, mid-conversation with 2 officers, stopped walking, turned, looked straight at me, and something crossed his face. I can only call recognition, though we had never met in our lives. He came to attention right there on his own deck, in front of everyone, and raised a slow, deliberate salute, and held it. I want to tell you what that did to me because I wasn't ready for it. For 3 years I'd been the guy nobody looks at twice, the widower, the limping ex-fireman nobody remembers to thank. I'd half started believing that was just what I was now. And here was a stranger, in front of 200 passengers who'd just watched me get quietly demoted to the bottom of his ship, treating me like I mattered. I set my bag down, straightened up as much as my hip allows, and returned it. 2 men who'd never met, on the deck of a cruise ship, honouring something most of the people around us couldn't see at all. The captain crossed the deck, shook my hand, and said, loud enough that half the promenade heard it, "Sir, it is an honour to have you aboard my ship." Then he turned to the cruise director, who'd come hustling up behind us, pale as the deck rail, and said, calm but carrying, "This man and his son are going back to their suite. And I believe someone owes them an explanation and an apology." The director stammered something about the charter, about the board member, about protocol. The captain let him finish and said only, "Protocol just tried to move a man with a service record longer than your career into the bottom of my ship to make room for someone's cousin. Fix it. Now." Word came back within the hour that the board member's family had been delighted to accept a different, equally fine suite. Funny how fast that happens once a captain gets involved. Cole and I were walked back to our room. The deckhand who'd gone to the bridge came by personally, brought Cole a little enamel pin shaped like an anchor, and made an absolute fuss over him. And my son, 5 minutes removed from watching his father get quietly humiliated, was glowing again, telling her all about the whale-watching excursion we'd booked. And the whole deck had shifted around us the way a crowd does once the truth walks in and stands there, A few passengers who'd looked away earlier, now nodding at me, one older man reaching over to shake my hand without a word. The way people do when they recognize something in you they can't quite name. I sat back down in that suite with my throat tight, thinking, Renata. I almost let them take this from him. But I still didn't understand why a total stranger had gone to that trouble. Not yet. I found out that evening when an officer knocked and asked if I'd join the captain on the bridge for a few minutes once we'd cleared the channel. I went up, and the captain, Captain Nathaniel Ruiz, I finally got his name properly, waited until the door closed, and the composed captain's face fell away entirely. Mr. Whitfield, he said, I need to ask you something, and I think I already know the answer. 4 years ago, the apartment fire on Delgado Street, 3rd floor, the collapse. A ladder man who went back in twice after the Mayday call to pull people out of a stairwell that came down 40 seconds after the last one was clear. That was you. My stomach dropped because, yes, that was the day the hip and the hearing went. That was the day I still don't talk about. The commendation for it sits in a drawer I haven't opened in years. Because the men I remember from that stairwell aren't all men I got to walk back out with. A commendation like that isn't a trophy. It's a receipt for the worst day of your life, and I'd hand mine back in a second to undo the reason I have it. How do you know about that, Captain? His voice broke. Because my sister and her 2 kids lived on that 3rd floor. You carried my niece out on your shoulder. You went back in for my sister when the second collapse was already coming down around you. I've spent 4 years not knowing the name of the man who did that. Then this afternoon my deckhand tells me they're moving a passenger named Whitfield out of his suite for a corporate charter, and I look at the manifest, and he stopped. Put a hand over his mouth. This broad, silver-haired man, in charge of 80,000 tons of ship. And his shoulders were shaking. I stood there on that bridge and couldn't say a word either, because the whole thing had gone strange and enormous all at once. Of every ship, every itinerary, every cabin on it, I had booked passage, with 2 years of dollars from a mason jar, onto the one vessel in the fleet captained by the uncle of a girl I'd carried out. Of a burning stairwell. You can call that coincidence. I've stopped trying to. There's no math that makes those odds work, and I quit doing the math a while ago. I think Renata had a hand in it, if you want to know what I actually believe. I think she looked down at her widowed husband and her 10-year-old, saving nickels in her old laundromat jar to keep her promise, and pulled some string that isn't ours to pull, and made sure that on that one voyage, somebody stood on that deck who'd make sure her son saw his father honored. Believe that, or don't. I believe my wife booked us the right ship. My niece is 12 now, the captain said, gripping my hand in both of his. My sister is alive to raise her because you went back in. I am going to captain this ship more carefully than I have ever captained anything in my life, with you and your boy aboard. It is the honor of my career to have you on this deck. You should never have been asked to move. Not on my ship. Not anywhere. The cruise line made it right, in the ways companies do once word travels. A full refund. A standing invitation back aboard any voyage, captain's suite, for as long as the company exists. There were apologies, some real, some corporate-shaped. I asked, specifically, that the young director not lose his job over it. I've made enough mistakes of my own to know what one bad hour can cost a young man. And I didn't want Renata's promise fulfilled at the price of somebody else's whole career. I hope he learned something. I think he did. He found me at the gangway before we disembarked and apologized like he meant it, which is more than I expected. But none of that, not the refund, not the standing invitation, is the actual reward. You don't go back into a burning stairwell for a reward, and you don't get to collect one for it years later either. The reward was watching my son's face. Because Cole saw the whole thing. He watched his father get quietly moved to the bottom of a ship. And then he watched a captain stop mid-stride on an open deck and salute that same father in front of 200 strangers. He got to hear, that night, a version of the story he was old enough for, that his dad had once gone into a burning building when everyone else was coming out, and that somewhere out there, a girl he'd never met was alive at 12 years old because of it. For 3 years, my son had watched me limp, watched me grieve his mother, watched the world mostly look past the two of us managing on our own. And on that one improbable ship, he got to see me seen. Got to see that the tired dad who overcooks the pasta and can't braid hair worth a damn had done something once that mattered enough for a stranger to stand at attention over it. That's not a reward you can put a price tag on, and I wouldn't trade it for one that had a price tag at all. We finished the voyage the way Renata would have wanted it. Captain Ruiz personally made sure our balcony faced open water every evening, and on the last night, out past the wake, with Cole leaning against the rail beside me, we watched the horizon do that exact thing she used to describe. The line where the sea just quietly stops being visible and becomes something bigger than a line at all. I'd brought a small amount of her ashes, tucked into my jacket, the way she'd asked once, half joking, half not. If I never get my real trip, just take a little of me out on the water anyway. So on that last night, with Cole's hand in mine, I let her go into that dark water. And my son, watching it, said, "Bye, Mom. We made it out here for you." 6 words from a 10-year-old that near about put me on the deck. Because that's exactly what we'd done. All those dollars in a laundromat jar. All that pushing through. We'd made it out here. I don't know how many moments in a life you recognize, while they're happening, as the reason you were put on this earth. That was one of mine. Everything else, the ladder company, the commendation, all of it, I'd trade before I traded that one dark, quiet stretch of railing. That standing invitation the cruise line gave us, I use it exactly once a year, on the anniversary. And every time, I check the roster first, because Nathaniel Ruiz is still out there captaining, and more than once now it's been his ship. More than once, his niece. The girl I carried out on my shoulder, 17 now, has been waiting at the gangway to meet Cole. And the two of them tear around that ship together like they've known each other their whole lives, which, in the way that matters, they have. I'm still just a guy with a bad hip and a faded t-shirt. Most days the world looks straight past me, and I've made my peace with that. But I learned something on that deck I already half knew and needed reminding of, that the world is full of people getting looked past by folks who have no idea what they've carried or lost or given up. That director looked at me and saw nobody worth a window. That captain looked at me and saw everything. The only difference between them was whether they bothered to find out. I've decided, for whatever time I've got left, to try to be the kind who bothers. That last night in the cabin, Cole asked me, half asleep, "Dad, was the captain right? Are you a hero?" I told him no, that I was just his dad. That a long time ago I had a very bad day and tried to do the right thing on it, and some people came home because of it. And that's about all a hero really is. A regular person who does the right thing on their worst day. He nodded, already drifting, and said, "I'm going to do that too someday," and fell asleep before I could answer. I sat there in the dark a long while, listening to the ship move, thinking, there it is, Rin. That's the whole thing we were trying to give him. He's got it. So here's what I'll leave you with, because I genuinely want to hear it from you. That director and that captain looked at the same tired man in the same faded shirt, and one of them saw nobody worth a window, and the other saw someone worth saluting. The only difference was whether they took the time to learn the story underneath. Tell me down in the comments, when has someone taken the time to learn your story or someone else's, and it changed the whole picture? Who saw the real you when everyone else was looking past? I read every one of them.